The desert air was dry, sharp, and heavy with the scent of burning diesel when the first shots rang out. Dust kicked up against the side of the armored Humvee, and Sergeant Daniel Reaper Hensley slammed his shoulder into the turret shield, shouting, "Incoming!" Contact left. The convoy had been rolling through the outskirts of a bombed-out Afghan village, the kind of place where every cracked window and abandoned courtyard could hide death. They'd been running this route for weeks, securing supply lines, escorting engineers. Predictable routine. And now the routine had snapped apart like glass. Bullets pinged off metal, the sharp whine of ricochets echoing through the narrow street. A rocket-propelled grenade whooshed past, striking the last vehicle in the convoy, engulfing it in a fireball. The screams that followed were ragged, cut short by the thunder of secondary explosions. Chaos tore through the platoon. Men scrambled for cover, ducking behind the Humvees, laying down return fire. Radios cracked with overlapping voices, some panicked, others barking orders. The ambush was well-timed, well-coordinated. Insurgents had waited until the perfect choke point, and now the soldiers were pinned. Private First Class Elena Torres felt her heart hammer against her chest as she pressed her back against the inside of the Humvee. She had signed up as a medic, trained to save lives under pressure, not to hurl herself into firefights like this. But war had a way of stripping away the lines between roles. A wounded corporal dragged himself past the open door, blood pooling from his leg. Elena didn't hesitate. She grabbed her kit, yanked him inside, and pressed a tourniquet around his thigh. Her hands were steady even though her pulse raced like a drum in her ears. "Stay with me," she told him firmly, forcing her voice into calmness. "You're not dying here. Not today." Outside, Reaper raked the rooftops with suppressive fire, but there were too many muzzle flashes, too many shadows slipping between crumbling walls. The SEAL team attached to the convoy, special operators brought in for intelligence gathering, moved with surgical precision, flanking through alleys, firing short, controlled bursts. Their leader, Chief Petty Officer Cole Maddox, barked commands into his comms, his tone sharp but unflappable. "Elena!" Reaper shouted, ducking back inside the Humvee, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "We're getting shredded out there. We need another gun up." "I'm a medic, not anymore. Grab the rifle." The words weren't cruel, just raw necessity. He tossed her the M4 that had been lying against the seat, and for a split second Elena stared at it like it was an alien object. She'd qualified on the range, sure, but this wasn't paper targets. This was life or death. She felt the weight settle into her hands, heavier than its steel and polymer should have been. Another explosion rattled the ground, closer this time. The Humvee shook. The corporal moaned, his blood seeping into the seat. Elena's instincts screamed to stay beside him, keep pressure, stabilize, but outside soldiers were dying, pinned, needing a chance to move. She drew in a breath, shoved down the fear, and pushed the door open. The world outside was fire and lead. She slid into the dirt beside Reaper, rifle raised clumsily at first, then tighter as training clawed its way back from memory. She spotted movement on a rooftop, shoulders a flash of steel. Without thinking, she exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The insurgent dropped, his weapon clattering against stone. Reaper glanced at her with surprise, then gave a curt nod. "Good. Now keep going." They pushed forward, laying down fire while the SEALs maneuvered to clear the kill zone. Elena's shots were shaky at first, but necessity has a way of sharpening the edge. Each trigger pull became more deliberate, each sight picture more precise. She shifted from cover to cover, dragging wounded soldiers when she could, shooting when she had to. Somewhere in the blur of smoke and adrenaline, she realized she wasn't just a medic anymore. She was fighting to keep her platoon alive in a different way. Minutes bled together into an eternity. At last, Maddox's voice cut through the radio. "Clear. Area secure. Regroup at the convoy." The gunfire tapered off, leaving only the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. Elena dropped to her knees beside a sergeant clutching his abdomen, hands slick with blood. She worked feverishly, every ounce of focus pouring into the wound, sealing, patching, injecting. When she finally tied off the last bandage, she sat back, her chest heaving. Around her, the survivors were gathering, grim-faced, some laughing the bitter laugh of those still alive. Maddox approached, his tactical gear scuffed and smeared, his expression unreadable. He crouched beside her as she wiped her bloody hands on her pants. "You handled yourself out there," he said. His voice was gravel but not unkind. "I did what I had to," she replied, her throat dry. He studied her a moment longer, then gave the faintest hint of a smile. "Remind me not to piss you off." Reaper barked a tired laugh, clapping her on the shoulder. Medic my ass. You just saved half this damn platoon with that rifle. Elena didn't feel like laughing. Her stomach twisted with the faces of those she couldn't save, the Humvee still burning in the distance, the cries of men she hadn't reached in time. She wasn't sure if she'd crossed a line or if that line had ever existed in the first place. Night fell hard over the outpost when they finally limped back. The air reeked of sweat, cordite, and iron. Soldiers slumped against walls, cleaning rifles, bandaging wounds, staring blankly into the dark. Elena sat alone near the medical tent, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline had faded. She couldn't get the feel of the trigger out of her mind, the moment when fear had turned into something colder, sharper. Maddox found her there, leaning against a crate with a canteen in hand. He offered it wordlessly and she drank, the water cool against her parched throat. "You think too much," he said after a long silence. "I'm a medic. Thinking is what keeps people alive. And shooting kept you alive today. Don't get stuck in what you were trained to be. Out here, the battlefield decides what you are." She stared at him, trying to read the man behind the calm, steady eyes. Navy SEALs were legends, myths wrapped in flesh. Maddox looked tired, but there was something else. A recognition maybe that he'd seen this transformation before. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" she asked bitterly. "It's not supposed to make you feel anything. It's just the truth." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The night hummed with generators, with distant gunfire echoing from somewhere far beyond the walls. Elena felt the weight of the day pressing into her chest, heavier than her body armor had ever been. She had come here to heal. Today she had killed. And though her hands still remembered the warmth of blood and the softness of flesh she tried to save, they also remembered the recoil of the rifle, the steady rhythm of sight and breath and trigger. That contradiction sat inside her, alive and unresolved as the desert night stretched on. When dawn broke, the outpost stirred to life again. Orders came down fast. Intel suggested the ambush hadn't been random. Someone had tipped off the insurgents about their convoy route. Trust thinned like paper among the ranks. Maddox's SEAL team was tasked with investigating, but the platoon would have to keep running missions, keep exposing themselves to risk. Elena strapped on her gear with shaking hands. She caught her reflection in a cracked mirror nailed to the tent post. Her eyes looked older than she remembered, harder. For the first time, she wondered if she would ever see herself as just a medic again, or if that part of her had burned away with the convoy in the desert. The call came. Another patrol, another road, another chance to live or die. As she climbed into the Humvee, Reaper smirked at her, his voice low but filled with a strange respect. "Welcome to the fight, document. No going back now." And in that moment, Elena Torres, medic turned riflewoman by necessity, realized he was right. There was no going back. The next mission came before anyone had time to breathe. Orders were blunt, the kind that left no room for argument. The convoy would run supplies to a forward combat outpost near the valley, a place where insurgent activity had been steadily growing. It was the same route they had bled on yesterday, only farther, deeper into hostile ground. The soldiers grumbled, cursed, and checked their weapons twice over. They knew what it meant, bait in the open again, daring another ambush. Elena climbed into the Humvee with a weight in her chest heavier than the body armor strapped across her shoulders. She tried not to think about the faces she hadn't saved the day before. Tried not to think about the man on the rooftop whose life she had ended with one squeeze of the trigger. She told herself she would stay a medic today, keep her rifle close but focus on saving lives. She wanted that to be true. The convoy rumbled out of the wire at dawn, tires grinding against sand and gravel, engines roaring low. The sun painted the horizon in pale gold, but it did nothing to chase away the tension hanging inside each vehicle. Reaper sat across from her, chewing on sunflower seeds like nothing could rattle him, though his jaw was tight. Beside him, Private Lewis fiddled with his helmet strap over and over, eyes darting toward every window they passed. "You're bouncing your leg again," Reaper muttered to Elena without looking at her. She stilled, realizing she'd been shaking with nerves. "You noticed? Hard not to when it makes the whole truck feel like a washing machine." His grin was tired but deliberate, a small attempt to cut through the silence. Before she could reply, Maddox's voice cut in over the comms. "Eyes sharp. Intel says they know we're coming. Expect contact." And then, as if summoned by his words, the crack of gunfire erupted from the ridgeline. Dust spat into the air around the lead vehicle, and the convoy braked hard. Shouts filled the radio. "Another ambush. Contact right. 2 o'clock ridge." Reaper yelled, swinging his weapon toward the slope. Elena pressed herself against the armor, heart in her throat. Bullets slammed against the steel hull with metallic screams. She could feel the vibrations under her boots, each impact a reminder that only inches of metal separated her from death. A scream tore through the Humvee's comms. Another vehicle hit. Without hesitation, Elena grabbed her kit. "Cover me," she shouted, her voice louder than she thought possible. She shoved the door open and sprinted across open ground toward the smoking vehicle. Bullets cracked around her, snapping the air like whips. She ducked low, legs pumping, praying each step wouldn't be her last. Reaper cursed and laid down covering fire, his rifle barking steady bursts. Maddox's SEALs flanked to the right, moving with cold precision, cutting down insurgents with clean shots. Elena skidded to the disabled Humvee, yanked open the door and found two men bleeding inside. One had shrapnel in his neck, the other a shattered arm. She forced herself into calm, dragging them out one by one, ignoring the sting of heat and the taste of dust in her mouth. "You're gonna make it," she told them both, though she didn't know if it was true. Her hands moved on autopilot, pressure dressings, airway checks, bandages. She blocked out the firefight, the chaos. This was her battlefield. A shadow fell across her. She spun, rifle raised, finger tightening on the trigger. It wasn't an insurgent. It was Maddox, crouching beside her, rifle still hot. "You're exposed out here," he snapped. "So are they," she shot back, motioning to the wounded. For the first time his calm cracked just a little. He looked at her with something between frustration and respect. Then he swiveled and unleashed a burst of fire at the ridge, dropping another attacker. "Fine. I'll buy you time." Together they worked in tandem, an unspoken rhythm forming between them, her saving, him shielding. It was insane, reckless, yet necessary. Minutes later, air support roared overhead, a 10 screaming as they strafed the ridge. The ground shook with concussive blasts. Insurgents scattered like ants under fire. The ambush broke apart, leaving only smoke and silence. The soldiers regrouped, dragging the wounded back to vehicles, patching damage, reloading with trembling hands. Elena slumped against the Humvee, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. She could barely feel her arms. Her heart still raced with the leftover fear, but her patients were alive. That counted for something. Reaper clapped her on the shoulder as he passed. "Hell of a sprint, document. You just painted a bullseye on your back, but damn if you didn't pull it off." She didn't answer. She just stared at her bloodied hands, wondering how long she could keep doing this before one day she didn't make it back. That night, the platoon holed up at the forward outpost. The walls were little more than sandbags and HESCO barriers, the air thick with dust and exhaustion. Soldiers cleaned their rifles with silent focus, each man trapped in his own storm of thoughts. Elena sat near the fire pit, bandaging her blistered palms. She heard footsteps approach and knew without looking it was Maddox. He lowered himself onto the crate across from her, removing his gloves. "You don't belong out here," he said quietly. She bristled. "You think I don't know that? That's not what I mean. Most people break after one firefight. You didn't. Twice now you've stepped into the worst of it and kept moving. You belong here more than half the men I've seen." Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, deny it, insist she was just a medic trying to do her job. But she couldn't. Because deep down a part of her knew he was right. The battlefield had already reshaped her. "Don't read too much into it," she muttered. "I just don't like watching people die." "None of us do," he said. Then his voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "But you're carrying it differently. Watch yourself. That weight doesn't get lighter." They fell into silence. The crackle of the fire filled the gap between them, soldiers' laughter faint in the distance. For a brief moment, it almost felt like peace, though both knew it was temporary. The following days blurred into constant patrols, endless dust and simmering paranoia. The rumor mill churned, someone inside. Their network had been feeding information to the insurgents. Each mission felt like walking into a trap. Trust eroded quickly. Men eyed one another with suspicion, whispers cutting sharper than bullets. Reaper voiced what many were thinking one night as they cleaned their gear. "Somebody's leaking our routes. Every damn time we roll out, they're already waiting. It's not chance." Elena frowned. "You think it's someone in the unit?" Could be. Could be higher up. Doesn't matter. We're the ones eating the bullets." Maddox overheard, his expression unreadable as always. "That's what we're here for," he said simply. "Find the leak, stop the ambushes. Until then you keep your head down and do your job." Easy words to say. Harder to live by when every step outside the wire felt like it might be your last. The breaking point came 3 days later. Another convoy, another stretch of road through the valley. This time the attack came from both sides at once. heavy machine guns on the ridge, mortars dropping from hidden tubes, and small arms fire pouring from abandoned huts. The first blast flipped the lead Humvee, fireballing into the sky. Screams tore through the comms. Soldiers scrambled for cover, chaos erupting instantly. Elena's ears rang as she hit the dirt, debris raining down around her. She saw Reaper pinned behind a rock, exchanging fire with 3 insurgents closing fast. Without hesitation, she dropped prone, rifle steadied against the ground. She lined up her sights, breath slow, finger taut. 1 shot, 2, 3, each insurgent dropped in turn. Her hands were steady. Too steady. Reaper looked back wide-eyed, then gave her a sharp grin. "Remind me never to play cards against you, Doc." But Elena barely heard him. The shots still echoed in her mind, but this time there was no tremor of fear, no hesitation. She felt cold, precise. She didn't know if that terrified her more than the firefight itself. The battle raged on, stretching for what felt like hours. Maddox's SEALs maneuvered through the huts, clearing them room by room. Air support came late, pounding the ridges into dust, but not before the platoon had taken heavy casualties. When the smoke cleared, the ground was littered with bodies. Some insurgents. Some American. The outpost received them in silence, rows of stretchers lined under the harsh floodlights. Elena worked until her hands were numb, until every wound was bandaged, every last breath counted or lost. Later, she sat outside, staring at the horizon where the mountains loomed black against the starlit sky. Maddox joined her again, silent at first. "You're changing," he said finally. She let out a hollow laugh. "Everyone changes here. Not like this. You're becoming something else. I don't know if it's good or bad yet." Elena didn't answer. Because deep down she didn't know either. She could still feel the weight of her rifle, the calm precision that had filled her during the firefight. It scared her, but it also made her feel alive. As the night deepened, the outpost fell quiet, save for the occasional murmur of radios. Elena leaned her head back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at her. She wondered what her family back home would think if they saw her now, no longer just the medic they'd hugged goodbye, but someone who carried both a kit and a rifle with equal certainty. The war was reshaping her, piece by piece. And she had no idea what she'd be when it was done. The morning after the Valley ambush, the outpost was quiet in a way that made every soldier uneasy. No laughter, no card games, no music playing from battered speakers. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. The kind of silence that came after burying too many brothers in a row. Soldiers moved like ghosts between the tents, eyes sunken, shoulders heavy. Elena Torres sat alone on an ammo crate, her rifle resting against her knee. She had scrubbed her hands 3 times already, but the smell of blood still clung to her skin, the memory of screams replaying every time she closed her eyes. She was exhausted, her body begging for rest, but her mind wouldn't let her stop. Every face haunted her, those she saved and those she couldn't. She thought about the insurgent she had dropped with 3 steady shots, the precision that had come too easily, too naturally. It frightened her how calm she had been, as if the line between medic and sniper had blurred beyond repair. Reaper dropped down beside her with a grunt, a half-eaten protein bar in his hand. "You're staring holes into the dirt," he said, chewing noisily. "I'm trying not to think," Elena muttered. "That never works." He leaned back against the wall, tilting his head toward her. "Word is command's not happy. Too many ambushes. Too many casualties. They want answers." She frowned. "Answers from who?" Reaper shrugged. "That's the problem. Nobody knows who to trust. Maddox's SEALs are tearing through the local networks trying to find the leak, but whoever's feeding intel to the enemy is still 1 step ahead." As if summoned, Maddox appeared from the command tent, his face grim, his eyes like ice. He didn't waste time with greetings. "Torres with me." Reaper raised a brow, but Elena stood without hesitation, following Maddox into the tent. Inside, maps and satellite images covered the table. Red circles marked routes that had all ended the same way, ambushes. "We've got a problem," Maddox said flatly, pointing at the map. "Every time we move they know. That means there's a leak somewhere close. Too close." Elena studied the map, her stomach twisting. "You think it's one of us?" "I don't know yet. But someone is feeding them convoy times, positions and objectives. That's not luck." His gaze fixed on her, sharp and unreadable. "I've seen the way you operate under fire. You're calm, deliberate. That's rare. I need someone like that watching my 6 while I dig deeper." She blinked. "You want me?" "I'm a medic, Maddox. Not one of your SEALs. You're both whether you admit it or not. You've proven it 3 times over. My men respect you. The platoon trusts you. You can move between both worlds without raising suspicion. That's exactly what I need. Elena hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. She had joined the army to save lives, not hunt traitors. But part of her knew he was right. The leak was killing her people. Sitting back wasn't an option. What do you need me to do? She asked finally. Maddox nodded once as if he'd known her answer before she gave it. Stay sharp. Watch everything. Listen more than you talk. If someone's slipping intel, they'll make a mistake. And when they do, we'll be ready. From that day forward, Elena found herself straddling two identities more than ever. By day, she patched wounds, checked vitals, reassured nervous privates that they'd make it home. By night, she trained with Maddox's team, long hours on the range, silent drills in abandoned huts, lessons in reading body language and spotting lies. She wasn't officially one of them, but Maddox treated her like she belonged, pushing her limits until she was running courses blindfolded, hitting targets she never thought possible. Reaper noticed the change before anyone else. You're different, he said one evening, watching her strip and clean her rifle with mechanical precision. I'm adapting, she replied simply. He snorted. You're turning into one of them. Elena didn't answer. Maybe he was right. The tension in the outpost grew worse with each passing day. Men jumped at shadows, whispered accusations behind closed doors. When a patrol failed to return one night, the whispers turned to outright anger. Fists flew. Trust shattered. Command ordered lockdowns, inspections, interrogations. But nothing concrete surfaced. Whoever the traitor was, they were good. The breaking point came during a night patrol along the river. Elena rode in the second Humvee, eyes scanning the darkness through her NVGs. The river shimmered faintly, a black ribbon cutting through the valley. Everything felt too quiet. Her gut twisted. Then the night exploded. Mortars rained down from the cliffs, shaking the ground, blasting holes into the earth. The lead Humvee went up in flames, a ball of fire lighting the night sky. Bullets tore from the treeline, tracers cutting red lines through the dark. Ambush! Ambush! Elena dove behind cover, rifle raised, heart hammering. Her medic's kit felt heavier than ever. She spotted movement on the cliff, an RPG team setting up another shot. Without thinking, she steadied her rifle, exhaled, and fired. One down. She adjusted, fired again. The second crumpled. The RPG clattered uselessly down the rocks. Nice shooting. Reaper shouted, laying down fire beside her. But there was no time to celebrate. Insurgents swarmed from the treeline, close enough for muzzle flashes to light their faces. The firefight turned brutal, chaotic, every second a gamble. Elena moved between soldiers, dragging the wounded, firing between bandages, saving and killing in the same breath. Then she saw it, a shadow breaking from the chaos, sprinting toward their rear flank. At first she thought it was an insurgent, but as the figure slipped under the glow of the burning Humvee, her blood froze. It was one of their own. A U.S. soldier. He carried a radio. Her heart slammed against her ribs. That was the leak. He was feeding positions in real time, guiding the ambush. Elena, what the hell are you doing? Reaper shouted as she bolted from cover, sprinting toward the figure. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She tackled him hard, both of them crashing into the dirt. The radio skidded away. The soldier fought back with surprising strength, punching, clawing. His face twisted with panic, desperation. Why? Elena hissed, pinning his arm. Why the hell are you doing this? His eyes burned with something between rage and fear. You don't understand. They got my family. If I don't... A gunshot cut him off. His body went limp beneath her, blood pooling fast. Elena froze, staring at him in shock. Maddox stood a few yards away, his rifle still smoking. You were about to die, he said flatly. She stared at him, her breath ragged, hands shaking. He was the leak. He could have told us. He was compromised. That's all that matters. The firefight raged on around them, but Elena barely heard it. She looked down at the dead soldier, at the radio lying useless in the dirt. His last words echoed in her head. They got my family. The battle ended with the insurgents retreating, leaving bodies and fire in their wake. The platoon regrouped, battered, broken but alive. Maddox ordered silence about the traitor, insisting it would be handled through channels. But the men had seen enough to know. Whispers spread fast. Trust, already thin, evaporated completely. That night, Elena sat outside the medic tent, staring at her bloody hands. Maddox approached again, his expression unreadable. You did good tonight, he said. She looked up sharply. Good? He was one of us. And you killed him before we could even. He was compromised. He was already dead the moment he chose them over us. You need to understand that, Torres. War doesn't give us the luxury of sentiment. Her voice shook with anger. He wasn't choosing them. He was protecting his family. Maddox's eyes softened just for a second. And in the process he put every one of ours at risk. That's not protection. That's betrayal. She turned away, bile rising in her throat. She wanted to hate him for being so cold, but deep down she knew he was right in the brutal, merciless logic of war. And that terrified her most of all, because part of her was starting to think like him. As the night stretched on, she sat with her rifle across her lap, staring into the dark beyond the walls. She knew now that the battlefield wasn't just outside, it was inside her, reshaping her piece by piece. Medic, sniper, protector, killer. She didn't know which part would win in the end. And for the first time she wasn't sure she wanted to find out. The night swallowed the valley whole, broken only by the distant crack of gunfire and the occasional burst of flares that turned the rugged ridgelines into ghostly silhouettes. Torres lay flat against the frozen ground, cheek pressed against the scope of the rifle she had come to trust more than anything. Her breath misted in the air, controlled, disciplined. The transition from medic to sniper had not been one she planned. War had forced it upon her. And now, with the SEAL team counting on her, failure was no longer an option. The radio in her ear crackled softly. Eagle's Nest, confirm overwatch, came the gravelly voice of Lieutenant Danner, the SEAL who had doubted her the most in those first brutal days. Torres adjusted her sight line, exhaled slowly and whispered, Eagle's Nest is locked. You've got eyes. There was a pause, then a curt, copy. Moving. Below her, she could see them, 6 figures in the darkness, ghosting between rocks and gullies, moving toward the insurgent compound. Intelligence said the enemy commander was holed up there, guarded by men who had survived more than one American raid. The kind who knew how to dig in and fight until their last bullet. Her scope swept across the ridgeline. She spotted movement, 2 shadows flanking along the high rocks, waiting for the SEALs to cross into the kill zone. She marked the first target in her mind, adjusted her breath and squeezed the trigger. The crack echoed against the valley walls, and one shadow crumpled silently. The second froze, searching for the shot, but Torres already had him in her glass. Another breath, another pull. Gone. Overwatch just bought you a clean lane, she whispered into her mic. Copy that, Danner said, and though his tone was clipped, there was no mistaking the grudging respect in it. Torres shifted, scanning again. Every decision she made carried weight now. Every bullet she fired meant someone lived or died. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself into the cold detachment she'd learned. Emotions could wait. Breathing, aiming, firing. That was her world in this moment. The SEALs reached the compound wall, crouched low, and began placing charges. Torres tracked above them, eyes sweeping the rooftops. That's when she saw it, the faint shimmer of metal, the subtle shift of a man trying to mask his movement. A rooftop sniper. He had a bead straight on the SEALs. Sniper rooftop 2 o'clock high. Torres hissed, already lining up. The enemy raised his rifle, but Torres was faster. Her shot cracked, and his weapon clattered to the stone before his body followed. The SEALs breached. The wall blew inward, dust and fire lighting up the valley like a flare. Gunfire erupted immediately, the sharp staccato of AKs mixed with the disciplined bursts of American rifles. Torres stayed steady, calling targets, firing when it mattered. She had no margin for error. Then, through the haze of smoke and chaos, she spotted him, the enemy commander, tall, broad-shouldered, barking orders and rallying his men. He wasn't hiding. He wanted the fight. He moved like a man who had survived a dozen raids and didn't fear death. Torres tracked him, finger on the trigger, but something made her hesitate. Her gut twisted. If she took him out here, in the middle of the firefight, the men inside might collapse. But if she missed, if she hesitated too long, the SEALs would be overwhelmed. Torres, do you have him? Danner's voice growled over the radio. I've got him, she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. Then drop him. She exhaled, focused and squeezed. The shot rang out, but the commander shifted at the last second, the bullet grazing his shoulder instead of ending him. He staggered, roared and raised his weapon. Shit, he's still up. Danner barked. Torres cursed herself. That moment of doubt had cost her. The commander ducked into the building, rallying his men with him. Gunfire intensified, and she could hear the SEALs calling for suppressing fire. The fight had just turned uglier. For the next 30 minutes, Torres was everywhere at once, snapping shots at windows, cutting down fighters before they could flank the Americans, keeping her men alive one bullet at a time. Her world shrank to the rhythm of breath and recoil, brass casings littering the ground around her. She felt her muscles ache, her eyes burn, but she didn't let up. Finally the gunfire below ebbed. The compound was theirs, though the cost was written in blood. 2 SEALs were down, 1 badly wounded. Torres descended from her overwatch to join them, rifle slung across her back, medic instincts roaring to life. She dropped to her knees beside the wounded man, a jagged piece of shrapnel embedded in his side. "Pressure bandage now," she snapped, pulling gear from her kit. Her hands moved with surgical precision, years of training guiding her even through exhaustion. She packed the wound, checked his airway, stabilized his breathing. Danner crouched beside her, helmet off, sweat and soot streaking his face. He watched her work, his jaw tight. "You saved us more than once tonight," he said quietly. Torres didn't look up. "Not enough. He's still breathing." "The commander?" She nodded, eyes locked on her patient. "I had him." I hesitated. Danner didn't argue. He just let the silence sit heavy between them. By dawn, helicopters thundered into the valley, lifting them out of the blood-soaked compound. Torres sat against the side of the bird, rifle across her lap, hands still stained with someone else's life. Her body ached, her mind replaying the moment she had doubted, the split second that had allowed the enemy commander to escape. Back at base, the debrief was brutal. The mission was a tactical success, but the enemy leader had slipped away again. Command wasn't happy. And Torres? She couldn't stop seeing the man's face through her scope. That night, as the team gathered in the mess hall, the atmosphere was strangely light. Laughter mingled with the smell of overcooked food. Soldiers found humor where they could, squeezing life out of the shadows. One of the SEALs, a wiry Texan named Holt, raised a plastic cup in her direction. "To Doc," he said with a grin. "Hell of a shot for someone who used to hand out aspirin." The room chuckled, even Danner cracked a half smile. Torres rolled her eyes, but a corner of her mouth twitched upward. "Careful," she said dryly. "Next time I'll let you bleed." The laughter grew, and for a moment the war seemed far away. But when the laughter died and the mess hall emptied, Torres sat alone, staring at her untouched food. The respect of the men, the grudging acceptance of Danner, it all felt hollow compared to the weight of her failure. The commander was still out there, planning, waiting. She clenched her fists, made herself a promise. The next time she had him in her sights, she wouldn't hesitate. Not for a second. Outside, the desert wind howled, carrying with it the scent of dust and fire. The war wasn't done with her yet. The desert sun had barely risen when Torres was summoned to the operations tent. The air inside hummed with tension. Maps spread across tables, radios chattering in clipped bursts, commanders hunched over intelligence reports. Torres stepped in, rifle slung on her shoulder, dust still clinging to her boots. Her eyes went immediately to the screen pinned at the center. Grainy drone footage of the man she hadn't killed. The commander. He was alive, wounded but moving, his shoulder bandaged crudely. He rode in the back of a rusted truck, surrounded by fighters. Torres felt her stomach twist. She didn't need anyone to tell her. This was her fault. "Intel confirms he's regrouping here," the operations officer said, tapping the map. "Village 30 clicks north. He's consolidating forces, recruiting, spreading propaganda. If he hardens that position, we'll be fighting him for months." Lieutenant Danner stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't glance at Torres, but she could feel his words unspoken. This should have ended last night. Command continued. "Objective is surgical. Eliminate the target, disrupt his network, exfil before they can mount a counteroffensive. SEAL team will lead the breach. Army Overwatch will provide sniper support." All eyes turned to Torres. She felt the weight settle like a stone. This was her second chance or her last. "Can you do it?" the colonel asked her directly. Torres straightened, forcing steel into her voice. "Yes, sir. I won't miss again." The colonel studied her for a beat, then nodded. "Good. Wheels up in 4 hours." Preparation was ritual now. Torres cleaned her rifle with reverence, every motion deliberate, controlled. She checked her optics, her rangefinder, her wind charts. She repacked her medic kit, not because she doubted her shooting, but because she knew war rarely cared about promises. In the team room, the SEALs joked as they loaded magazines. Holt cracked wise about betting on who'd drop the commander first. Someone else said Torres could probably save them ammo. She smiled faintly, but their words rolled over her. Danner approached, his presence heavy, his gaze sharp. "Last night you hesitated," he said bluntly. Torres met his eyes. "I won't again." "You better not," he said. But this time his tone carried no scorn, only urgency. He walked away without another word. The helicopter ride out was a blur of rotors and adrenaline. Torres sat pressed against the door, rifle across her lap, wind whipping at her face through the open bay. She replayed the image of the commander in her head, burned it into her vision. She imagined him falling. She imagined the silence after. The village appeared below, clusters of mud brick homes nestled in the valley, a river cutting through its edge. It looked peaceful from above. Torres knew better. 2 minutes, the crew chief shouted. The SEALs checked their gear one last time. Torres closed her eyes, breathed deep, and locked herself into that razor focus where nothing existed but her rifle and the target. They set down half a click out, moving fast through the gullies, keeping low. Torres peeled off to her overwatch position, climbing the ridge with practiced efficiency. By the time the SEALs ghosted into the outer edge of the village, she was already prone, scope scanning. It didn't take long. Her heart lurched as she spotted him, standing in the courtyard of a compound, surrounded by fighters. He moved with authority despite his wound, pointing, barking orders, his presence magnetic to his men. She exhaled, lined him up. The crosshairs settled on his chest. Her finger found the trigger. And then she froze. Not from doubt this time. From the sight of children. Half a dozen of them playing in the alley just behind him. If her shot went even slightly off, if he moved at the wrong second, one of them could die. Her gut clenched. Eagle's nest, do you have him? Danner's voice was sharp in her ear. Torres swallowed hard. I have him. Take the shot. She steadied her breathing. The commander shifted, turning slightly, his men closing in. Torres recalculated angles, trajectories, risk. Her finger trembled. Then he moved forward, away from the children, into the open. Torres didn't hesitate. She fired. The bullet slammed into his chest. He staggered, dropped to his knees, and collapsed. Target down, she hissed into the radio. Confirmed, Danner replied. Move, move, move. The SEALs surged into the compound, weapons blazing. Fighters scattered in confusion, leaderless now. Torres provided overwatch, dropping men as they tried to regroup. The courtyard turned into chaos, dust and gunfire filling the air. But killing the commander didn't end it. The fighters didn't break. They fought harder, like rabid dogs desperate for revenge. RPG fire streaked across the village, hammering into walls. One blast shook Torres's perch, showering her with stone fragments. She kept firing, eyes burning, mind locked in that deadly rhythm. One man, then another, then another. She lost count. Then she heard it, a scream in her earpiece. Man down. Holt's hit. Her blood turned cold. She yanked her rifle back, scanning the courtyard. Holt lay sprawled, blood spreading fast. Danner was dragging him behind cover, shouting for a medic. Torres's instincts flared. She wanted to run down there, drop her rifle, grab her kit. But she forced herself to stay. Her job was the rifle. If she left her post, more would fall. Her hands shook as she fired again, covering the SEALs as they pulled Holt inside the compound. Every round was agony, her medic's heart warring with her sniper's duty. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the firefight began to die. The surviving fighters broke, fleeing into the hills. Danner's voice crackled. Compound secure. Exfil in 5. Torres slung her rifle and sprinted down the ridge, lungs burning. She crashed into the courtyard, eyes searching for Holt. He was pale, blood-soaked, barely conscious. Torres dropped to her knees beside him, ripping open her kit. Stay with me, Holt, she said fiercely, packing the wound, starting 4 fluids, pressing hard against the bleeding. His lips cracked into a weak grin. Told you, aspirin wouldn't cut it. Shut up, she snapped, fighting the tremor in her voice. You're not dying today. Danner crouched beside her, eyes locked on Holt, then on her. Can you keep him alive to the bird? Torres's hands moved without hesitation. Yes, but I need pressure on this wound. Without a word, Danner clamped his hand over Holt's side, pressing down as Torres worked. For the first time they weren't SEAL and Army, doubter and medic. They were just 2 soldiers trying to keep a friend breathing. The exfil bird roared overhead. They carried Holt aboard, Torres never lifting her hands from him. Her face was a mask of blood and focus. As the helicopter lifted, she finally allowed herself a breath. Holt was alive. Barely. Back at base, surgeons rushed him away. Torres stood in the corridor afterward, hands stained red, body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Danner approached, helmet tucked under his arm. You took the shot, he said quietly. Torres nodded, her eyes haunted. I almost didn't. Kids were in the line. You waited. You chose right. He paused. And you saved Holt. She looked up at him, anger flashing. Not enough. He's still in surgery. He might not make it. Danner's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Not as a commander, not as a skeptic, just as a man who knew the weight she carried. That night, Torres sat alone outside the barracks, staring at the desert stars. She had killed the commander. She had saved a teammate. But the war gave no peace, no closure. Holt's life hung in balance. Dozens of enemy fighters were dead, yet the war machine kept grinding forward. She thought about the children she'd seen, their faces in the alley, the innocents caught in the crossfire. She thought about how one hesitation, 1 second, could tip the scale between justice and tragedy. Her rifle leaned against her knee, her medic bag at her side. Two halves of herself, healer and killer. She wondered how long she could carry both. From the shadows, Danner's voice broke the silence. We go again in 48 hours. Command wants to hit their weapons caches before they regroup. Torres didn't answer at first. She just kept staring at the stars. Finally, she said softly, I'll be ready. But in her heart, she wondered if readiness was enough. The smell of antiseptic clung to Torres's uniform as she sat outside the field hospital, elbows on her knees, fingers tangled in her hair. Inside, Holt still fought for his life. Hours had passed since she'd handed him off to the surgeons, and every scream, every shuffle of boots, felt like it might be the moment they told her he hadn't made it. She wasn't supposed to be here, snipers weren't medics anymore. But her body had carried her here, as if reminding her she couldn't leave behind the part of herself that once only saved lives. Danner appeared in the corridor, helmet tucked under one arm, his face as sharp as ever. He stopped beside her, leaned against the wall and let the silence stretch. They're still working, Torres muttered. He nodded, then studied her with those steady, unreadable eyes. You kept him alive long enough to get here. That's on you. She looked up at him, eyes tired and angry. And if he dies in there? Then it's still on you, Danner said bluntly. But not in the way you think. Holt had a chance because of you. Without you, he'd be in a body bag already. Torres clenched her fists, torn between rage and relief. He wasn't wrong. But his words didn't lighten the weight pressing on her chest. Before either could say more, the door opened. A surgeon stepped out, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. His eyes found Torres immediately. He made it, the doctor said. Critical but stable. He's going to need months of recovery, maybe a medical discharge. But he's alive. Torres exhaled, so hard her body nearly buckled. She felt Danner's hand press briefly to her shoulder, grounding her. That night, Torres didn't sleep. She sat on her bunk cleaning her rifle again, the metal gleaming under the dim light. Holt's survival didn't erase the truth, this war didn't pause. And sure enough, the call came the next morning. Command wanted them on another mission. The enemy had pulled back after losing their commander, but drones showed convoys moving at night, crates being offloaded into hidden caves. Weapons caches. Enough firepower to fuel insurgency for months if left untouched. The mission: infiltrate, demolish, get out before reinforcements arrived. Simple on paper. Deadly in execution. The briefing room smelled of stale coffee and sweat. A satellite image of jagged mountains filled the screen, dotted with red markers where the caches were suspected. The caves run deep, the intel officer explained. We've mapped 2 confirmed stockpiles here and here. Expect booby traps. Expect guards. Once you breach, plant C4 and collapse the entrances. No survivors if they're armed. Danner's eyes swept the team. We're going in light and fast. Sniper support on the ridge. He looked directly at Torres. That's you. You'll have the high ground. She nodded once, gripping her notebook so tight her knuckles whitened. Her thoughts flickered briefly to Holt, to his grin, to his voice saying aspirin wouldn't cut it. She shoved it down. She couldn't afford ghosts in her scope. The insertion was silent, blacked-out helicopters skimming low over barren ridgelines. The team rappelled down into the shadow of the mountains, boots crunching against shale. The night was clear, stars scattered like glass across the sky. Torres climbed hard and fast, lungs burning as she scaled the ridge above the caves. She dug in, rifle braced, eyes scanning the valley. Shadows moved at the cave mouths, armed sentries smoking, talking, unaware of the hunters closing in. Her radio crackled. Eagle's Nest status? Overwatch set, Torres whispered. Copy. Move. The seals flowed toward the first cave, silent as phantoms. Torres tracked the sentries. Two of them shifted, starting to drift closer to where the team moved. She exhaled and squeezed. One dropped, then the other, bodies crumpling before they could even cry out. The team slipped past unseen. The first breach went smooth. Torres watched them vanish into the cave, then explosions shook the ground minutes later as charges collapsed the entrance. Dust plumed skyward. First cache down, Danner reported. Moving to second. Torres swept her scope across the valley. Movement caught her eye, figures on the ridge opposite, cresting in numbers. Too many. A patrol, maybe more. She counted fast. At least 20, armed, converging toward the caves. Eyes up, she snapped into the radio. Contact incoming, 2 squads, ridge east. Gunfire erupted a moment later. The element of surprise was gone. Torres dropped 2 men before they even found cover, her shots echoing sharp across the valley. But the rest scattered, returning fire in wild bursts. Tracers sliced through the night, sparking off stone around her position. Torres, hold them back. Danner barked. We're still inside. She gritted her teeth, shifting position, sending round after round downrange. Her world narrowed to the scope, her pulse synced with the rhythm of her rifle. One target, then the next, then the next. But they kept coming. She saw one fighter set up an RPG, aiming straight at the cave where the SEALs worked. Her finger moved before thought, her bullet punching through his skull just as he pulled the trigger. The rocket veered wide, exploding harmlessly against the mountain wall. Thank you, Doc, one of the SEALs breathed over comms. Torres didn't answer. She was already lining up her next shot. Minutes felt like lifetimes. Her rifle barrel smoked, her shoulder ached from recoil. She had no time to think, only react. Every decision was split-second, life or death. Finally, Danner's voice came through. Second cache is set. Exfil in 2 minutes. Torres, we need cover. Copy, she whispered, jaw clenched. The SEALs spilled out of the cave as Torres laid down precision fire, cutting gaps in the enemy line. They sprinted through the chaos, shadows darting across moonlit stone. Behind them, the cave erupted in fire and thunder as the charges blew, collapsing tons of rock. But the enemy wasn't breaking. Reinforcements poured down from the ridges, firing wildly. Torres dropped another, then another, but her magazine clicked empty. She ejected, reloaded fast, barely pausing to breathe. Bird inbound, 30 seconds. The pilot's voice cut across the net. The SEALs bounded toward the extraction zone, bullets cracking around them. Torres pushed herself harder, firing until her last mag was nearly spent. Then she felt it, a sharp sting across her arm, hot blood soaking her sleeve. She'd been grazed. Her vision blurred, but she forced her focus back. Not now. Not here. The helicopter roared overhead, spotlight sweeping the valley. The SEALs piled aboard, returning fire as they went. Torres scrambled from her perch, sliding down loose rock, lungs screaming for air. She burst into the open just as the bird lifted off, rotors hammering. Danner leaned out, one arm extended. She leapt, his hand locking around hers, yanking her into the cabin. The door gunner opened up with a roar, mowing down the fighters closing in. The helicopter pulled away, the valley shrinking beneath them. Explosions glowed faintly in the distance where the caves had collapsed. Torres sat slumped against the wall, clutching her bleeding arm, rifle across her lap. Her chest heaved, her body trembling. Danner crouched in front of her, eyes sharp. You hit. Grace, she said, voice hoarse. I'm fine. He studied her, then nodded once. You held that line. If you hadn't, we'd be dead in that cave. Torres looked away, staring out the open door at the dark desert racing past below. She wanted to believe him. But all she could see in her mind was Holt lying on that table, his blood on her hands, and the enemy still out there regrouping. War didn't hand out victories. It handed out survival moment by moment. And she knew deep down, it wasn't over. Not yet. Back at base, the mood was different this time. The team was alive. The mission was a success. The caches destroyed. They cracked jokes in the debrief, Holt's name mentioned with respect, Torres' shots praised openly. But Torres couldn't shake the gnawing tension in her chest. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the images replaying. Children in the village. Holt's blood. The enemy flooding down the ridge. She had chosen to become both healer and executioner, but the war wasn't done testing how far she could stretch before she broke. And somewhere in the silence, she felt it, the pull of the next battle waiting just over the horizon. The dust of Kandahar still clung to their uniforms when the Black Hawks roared over the ridge, blades whipping the air into a storm. Evelyn sat on the skid with her rifle balanced across her knees, goggles pressed against her face, heart thundering not from fear but from the weight of what this final mission meant. The war had changed her, changed them all, and though victory felt close, it carried a cost that hung heavier than their packs. Below, the valley burned with smoke, tracer fire stitching lines into the night, and radio chatter crackled with urgency. The SEAL beside her nudged her shoulder. "You good, Doc?" She smirked faintly at the old nickname. "Haven't been a doc in a long time. Still the same heart. Just different tools." The bird dropped low, sudden flares bursting bright as RPG trails streaked toward them. They hit dirt with bone-jarring impact. She rolled, came up with her sniper rifle and scanned the ridge line. Shadows moved, too many. The mission wasn't just a strike. It was survival.